Episode 3. Prologue to Episode 3 is a flashback, 3 months before the incident. Daniel steals a watch from Sean's drawer. Do you remember what I said about Daniel's inclination to stealing in Episode 1? This scene muddies the waters of nature versus nurture again. It makes Daniel look like he's prone to stealing. Brothers get into a fight over it and accidentally break a father's trophy. Esteban tells Sean he's almost adult and needs to understand that Daniel is just a little kid who looks up to him, and asks Sean to be there for Daniel. Sean reluctantly agrees, then makes up with his brother, tells him he can keep the watch, and delighted Daniel replies he will keep them forever. Alright, good. Wholesome scene. After the flashback, Episode 3 starts in California. 2.5 months after the brothers parted ways with their grandparents, with Sean waking up in his tent, Daniel nowhere to be found, his watch unattended on the tent's floor. We may actually find out why later in the episode. Yay? A reward for a player's specific choice? Alternative scene? I have a great expectations for this episode already. Yet, here we are, creeping towards the strangest creative decision of the entire game. Brothers are living with Finn, Cassidy, and a group of other misfits now. Through Sean's journal and interaction with other characters, you learn you have met Finn's group by chance, and they invited Sean to work with them on an illegal wheat farm, owned by a guy named Merrill, with his enforcer, Big Joe. That sounds like a great adventure! So why not show it? Was the studio on a strict schedule? Would it be outside of their budget to model and show these parts of Sean's story? Would it make the game or episode too long? I cannot really label the omission of that part of the story a mistake, because it is clearly intentional and fits within the episodic division of the game. But I think the episodic concept is less digestible for players because it doesn't allow them to form a proper relation with presented characters, and also it is a non-standard narration in terms of content. It will take a while, and I will have to take a few detours, but let me explain why it just doesn't feel right to me. Even though the word episode suggests events happening in isolation, it also must be part of a larger narrative. There is obviously no guideline as how to divide episodes in a narrative and what should they contain. It is up to the writer to decide what events are important for the reader to see and what he can omit. You usually see the hero in the more important moments of his life. You don't see young Bruce Wayne having a tantrum about eating broccoli soup, you don't see him playing with toys or throwing chewing gums into classmates' hair. No, you see him falling into a Batcave. You see him during the murder of his parents, right? In the events that turn him into Batman. There is a thread connecting those events. First teaches him about fear, second gives him hatred for criminals. So when you see adult Bruce Wayne, it retrospectively makes sense why he uses the symbol he uses and why he does what he does. Those events molded his character. Now, the thing is, episodes in Life is Strange 2 work for Daniel because they show events in his life which form him into who is he going to become, but they don't always necessarily work for Sean. And that really sucks for me as the player. When Sean steals the Choco Crisp from the car in the first episode, it is a well-meant gesture for a hungry brother. The player doesn't think much about the impact of it, because he's not stealing the entire car, just $1 chocolate bar. But it teaches Daniel that stealing is okay. When Sean gets a haircut in episode 3, it doesn't mean much to him. Staying awake for 2 more hours is ultimately meaningless, but it makes Daniel feel abandoned by his brother in favor of Finn and Cassidy. I understand that events in episodes influence Sean as well, Obviously, he's present, but the force of impact is much stronger for Daniel. The thing is, episodes in Life is Strange 2 are treated more as isolated incidents, which for Sean/the player lack the overarching motif. It doesn't matter if he was friends with Lila or not, it doesn't matter if he stayed with his grandparents, and it doesn't matter if he met Finn's group. Because those people are locked in their respective episodes, and after the episode is done, they have no real impact on the rest of the game. They have some impact on the author of the game, but not on your experience, not on your journey. Why should the player care about fate of character like Lila, when they interacted for about 5 minutes during the entire game? I came across an interview with one of the writers of Life is Strange 2, Jean-Luc Cano, link below, who talks about Lila and mentions that after the first episode, that storyline was finished. The problem is, you can apply that to every character except Karen. Characters appear in their episode, but once that episode is over, they're gone and don't influence the story. That is not a finished storyline, that is a loose end to a storyline. Small effects of players' actions are seeping into other episodes, but they are predominantly more important for Daniel. And while I fully understand that the point of the game is to deal with education of a child, and that means sacrificing your own wants, the game is very unrewarding to the player. In other words, let the player have some fun. In the first episode, you are trying to take care of Daniel. In the second, you created rules for Daniel so he could take care of himself. And in the third episode, he rebels, making Sean and the player feel like giving up. Hilariously, even the interviewer tells the writer that after finishing the third episode, he felt a little like leaving Daniel behind. I had exactly the same feeling after finishing episode 3. But even at the start of episode 3, I was tired, because during the last 2 episodes, I was doing what I was expected to do, taking care of Daniel. And it was unrewarding. Again, I understand that taking care of a child is tough work and means giving up some of your time, but this is a video game for heaven's sake. When you keep pulling Chloe Price out of trouble the entire first season of Life is Strange, you have fun doing it. You get a sense of accomplishment. But when I spotted Cassidy at the Christmas market, I thought, finally, here's my chance to meet characters I find interesting. There's going to be an adventure. I'll have a chance to let Daniel a little loose, because he was doing whatever he wanted anyway, while I will have an opportunity to enjoy stories more important and more influential to Sean. Because, what exactly did Sean do in the second episode? Not much, right? While the first episode was adventurous, nothing happened for Sean during the second. Mushroom was eaten, but she bonded more to Daniel. You visited grandparents, but the only thing you did for them was chores. You met Chris, but he became Daniel's friend. You couldn't relate to Chris, he was too young. You found Karen's room, but Sean didn't care about it at all. It was Daniel who was interested, and he didn't need you to open the door. There was potential to talk to Charles about the loss of a loved one, but that was criminally glossed over. Or, let's say it differently. If you dropped off Daniel at your grandparents' house and then did nothing at all, things would have played out exactly the same for Sean. Sean didn't learn anything, didn't grow as a person, didn't have any interesting experience. Neither did I. Episode 2 had no characters relatable to Sean, up to the point when you meet Cassidy and Finn, and that moment teases you into thinking that the chore is over. Finally, it seems like Sean will also meet interesting people who will not only serve the story, but also help to explore and form Sean's character. Because Sean's character in episode 2 was, "Don't do it, Daniel," and "I don't care, dude, she left us." So why not show how Sean got to know the hippies, how he earned their trust, and they earned his, how he made the decision to stay with them, how they traveled, how Sean discovered who they are, and how awesome they are. Why not show that these people, living at the edge of society, aren't judgmental? They are free of typical bounds of society, but also, they have no safety nets.
It's not cool.
Wouldn't it be great to experience Sean's reaction when he got to Meryl's farm? Maybe he thought it would be fine and then they work with friends, harvesting wheat, till he saw Big Joe with an assault rifle and realized he might have gotten himself and his little brother in some serious mess. Hell, if you want to touch the issues of racism and immigration, I suspect Meryl's farm might be an interesting place to explore it. Let's forget that Meryl is a black guy for a second, shall we? On one hand, you can present embracing community of Finn, on the other, you can put Meryl and Big Joe as people who need workers willing to do cheap and illegal work, but are prejudiced against some of them. Sean needs money, but I'm sure it would make him especially anxious to be part of illegal operation growing marijuana in the middle of Californian woods with no safeguards in place. Especially with all those missing people posters around. Spending more time with those characters would allow portraying even bad guys as believable, as authentic. I would be thrilled to see all of that. Not only because that sounds like there are many great stories we missed out, but also because it would finally start to thread the needle of narrative for Sean. Sean hates Karen for leaving his family, and we, as players, have no say in that. Fine. But in episode 4, she explains that she doesn't know how to live in a regular society, so I think there's a pretty strong case to make that spending time with characters who for various reasons don't function in common society, including Sean himself, would not only give Sean a new perspective on his mother's decision, but it could also do something for the player. You could say that the game does subtly provide the player with exactly this experience, but even if that is the case, what does it matter if you cannot use that experience to make a decision later in the game? I will come back to that after we meet Karen. Also, based on the few scenes which try to make political commentary, biggest offender being the scene in the desert in episode 4, where the personification of racism manifests itself out of nowhere in the middle of the night, in the middle of the desert, gives Sean a hard time and then disappears into the darkness, I dare to say no. The game doesn't do things subtly. The game is criticized for making heavy-handed political commentary on various topics, and no wonder when the entire game is set up in a manner that individual episodes have almost no overarching themes, motifs, characters, places, etc. They fall flat. They are just screams into the dark. So the game glosses over the brothers and hippies encounter an entire phase of their cohabitation, and Sean, whose critical thinking I have been reproving in every chapter, more or less tells you, now you know these people and they are really cool. Presently, go and take care of Daniel in this new environment. I felt like Leonard from the Nolan Brothers movie Memento. So, where are you? You are in some tent? You just wake up and you are in a tent. There's an envelope. It feels like maybe it's the first time you've been here, but perhaps you've been there for a week, 3 months. It's kind of hard to say. I don't know. It's just an anonymous tent.
Why? How you miss all those insects?
It may be enough for some people to just accept that whatever Sean says is true. But not only I don't tend to blindly trust someone, I also have to point out that computer games are visual medium, so authors should strive to show us the good parts. Interestingly enough, in the second episode's after credits scene, we are shown the cannabis farm, we hear Daniel saying it stinks, Sean making fun of him, and Cassidy telling them, "Come on, I'll show you around." That makes me wonder if this short scene was made specifically for the trailer, after all, it doesn't show any characters, or if this was planned as a part of the gameplay or a larger scene, but for some reason got trimmed during the making. Trimmed like a weed butt. All in all, it feels really strange that after playing for about 10 hours as Sean's character, in the third episode, or roughly around the halfway point of the game in its entirety, I have to open my character's diary and read his description of what has happened, where am I, and who are the people around me. Why couldn't I share Sean's experience? And why should I feel anything to any of the characters surrounding Sean? I don't know them. They are complete strangers. And this is where I come back to my original point. Why should I care about the characters Sean spends time with when I don't know them? When the creators didn't even give me a chance to get to know them? to create bonds, friendships, relations. Instead, they are treated like they don't matter. This was the moment when game's storytelling more or less lost me, because it yet again decided to disconnect me from the character I was playing. It threw me into a situation my character was familiar with, but I wasn't, and it made no effort to unite my experience with the experience of my character. In episode 2, when I met Cassidy, I really enjoyed meeting her, and was looking forward to getting to know her more. But the game simply skipped what seemed like an important part of character building, and lazily just stated, "Here, this is the settings, these are the characters. Now improvise a scene, improvise feelings. Incredible." So, I really don't understand why the game skipped in time like this between episodes 2 and 3. It doesn't make any sense from a storytelling perspective to leave off such a big part of the brothers' journey and a huge chunk of potential character development. Then it presents us with Sean looking at tents and making coffee and chatting to people we are unfamiliar with in a camp we know nothing about, somewhere in Californian woods. All of their common experience but a footnote in Sean's diary. And before I continue, I would like to mention one tiny object in the camp. Missing people poster stapled to a tree. I wonder what was the purpose of it. I am sure I wasn't the only one, thinking that maybe our characters will somehow find with their own skin what dangers lurk among the great Californian redwood groves. Maybe that Meryl's operation is way shadier than it seems. It is nothing but a clickable object, but it has such an air of mystery surrounding it that I guess I wanted it to mean something.
It's just an object. Doesn't mean what you think.
It stuck to my memory throughout the entire episode because it felt like foreshadowing, like a setup for something, and I was expecting a payoff. That is why I wonder why it was put in the game, because it teases the player with yet another story more interesting than the one presented, like trimming weed butts. Oh yeah, I'm not going to stop reminding you that. Alright, back to the story. So we find ourselves in a camp near the wheat farm. Sean finds Daniel throwing a knife with Finn, and Sean doesn't like it one bit. Daniel secretly uses his power to throw knives like a ninja, to Finn's great delight. And once Finn leaves to get ready to work, Sean tells Daniel to stop using his power carelessly. They get into an argument over it, and Daniel accidentally shoves Sean to the ground using his power. This is a great character moment for everybody involved. Daniel doesn't like Sean bossing him around, so he spends time with Finn, who is the closest thing to a friend in the camp. Finn plays with him, tells him cool stories, throws knives with him. Sean doesn't like it. He only wants Daniel to sit tight while he makes enough money to travel to Mexico. I really feel Daniel's frustration here. I don't know what Sean was doing in the past month, but it seems he was giving Daniel a pretty hard time, just enforcing rules about Daniel using special power and otherwise not paying much attention to him. Even Finn tells Sean to be more zen. If we had a chance to explore that past month from Sean's perspective, this could make sense. But because of the way this episode is structured, we are only told that Sean has been a shitty brother. Again, I as a player would like to reserve that option for myself. The frustrating part for me isn't that the creators omitted these chunks of game for lack of writing skill, or lack of imagination, or inability to write cool characters and powerful moments. They prove time and time again throughout this game that they absolutely can do all of those things. The burning sense of frustration comes from the fact that they just don't show these important parts in favor of trimming weed butts. So, brothers get to Big Joe's truck to take them to Meryl's wheat farm. On the way, Cassidy talks to Sean, who doesn't listen, and instead, like a jilted lover, watches Finn and Daniel having fun. Upon arrival, Meryl tells Sean to keep his brother on a short leash, because he doesn't like kids around. If Daniel fucks up, Meryl will kick you both out. What was he talking about? I don't know. Then, the game makes you trim aforementioned weed butts for 10 minutes straight, with some flavor dialogue, but nothing of importance happens. I genuinely don't understand why was this scene edited or kept in, especially since the location, meaning the cannabis farm, is already built. You can walk there freely at the end of the episode. So why not use animation to skip over Sean's work? You could even let the player choose whether he wants to stay inside with Cassidy or help Finn outside, and then announce, alright, that was hard work, let's have a lunch break. And let the player wander around the wheat farm, soak up the atmosphere, have a moment of calm, and let Sean sketch. Talk to other characters, maybe snoop out some of the backstories of Meryl and Big Joe. And after spending a little time here, just finish the workday with another animation and with everybody getting back to the camp. Virtually anything seems better than the Scissorhand minigame which made it into the main story. And again, I wonder why we weren't given the option to move around a little. I'm sure many players would be happy to explore this area, because it is a genuinely intriguing place. How many times do you get a chance to see a place like this? Aren't you at least a little bit curious how such a place looks? Maybe there was something in the development process which made it impossible, strict publishing schedule or not enough budget. But I keep thinking about the stuff game plainly left out, and it really seems like there are enough stories for DLC. Intermezzo, The Strays.
Oh, thanks for coming.
Not to mention, if you visit Meryl's farm and snoop around during the day, it would set some sort of atmosphere of this place. Sunny day, fun with friends, happy plants everywhere. Maybe even Tough Guy Joe could have a weaker, humanizing moment.
Shit, it's always something.
It would be in a stark contrast to players return later, during the night, when wheat plants look like monstrous triffids, and you are coming back either with nefarious intention to steal or to stop a robbery. It could make for a great switch in the overall impression of a familiar place. To come back to the scene we actually got, I have a feeling that the narrative is somewhat backward. The scene started with Meryl telling you not to let Daniel fuck up again, and then nothing happens. The direct quote is, "Next time your brother fucks up, you are both gone ASAP." It is never explained what happened. So, why not start the scene with wheat trimming, then letting Daniel do some mischief, then letting Meryl give Sean a hard time for it? With this little change, where Daniel causes trouble and Sean gets punished for it, it would make more sense for Sean and the player to be tougher on Daniel, which would in turn push Daniel away from Sean's strict supervision and move him closer to Finn and his do-whatever attitude. We get a setup and a payoff. That is very important. That is what makes stories satisfying. So, after the wheat trimming business, Sean gets back to the camp and the player is free to roam around a little. Also, we get to peel potatoes, help Daniel wash the dishes, carry water jugs. Another day in fun and interactive game of Life is Short 2. More importantly, we get to have a few character moments. Let's talk about them for a while. Please don't hold it against me if I connect characters to plot promises and payoffs sometimes. I do it only because characters are great at delivering payoffs and consequences, and the more we care about the character, the stronger we feel the impact when they are influenced by our actions. Character moment is quite a wide descriptor, but in general it means what we remember the character for. It can be how we see them for the first time. For example, nobody will ever forget seeing Ridley Scott's Alien enter the scene, even though Alien hardly has any character. To stay with actual humans, the introduction of the man known just as Harmonica in Once Upon a Time in the West immediately tells you what a badass this character is. Jack Sparrow's first scene in Pirates of the Caribbean not only tells you a lot about his character, but also brilliantly sets the tone for the entire movie. To stay in Life is Strange, Cassidy has a great introductory moment in episode 2.
You got a crush on me or something?
What?
Sean and Danielle have a great moment at the end of Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit. Their entrance raises a lot of questions and anticipation. Character moment can also mean how the character behaves in a certain situation. Finn has multiple great moments in this game, the best one missed by majority of people when Big Joe asks who threw the tray on his head and player doesn't step forward, because that moment shows Finn doesn't just care about himself. Character moment can be even something for the character's background, not related to the plot. The campfire scene later in this episode offers many great examples. I have to say, I genuinely grew fond of all the characters in the camp, because during this episode we have quite a lot of good character moments, right? Not only with Cassidy and Finn, but also Hannah and Penny, for example. You get to know a lot about them, but just when you do, the episode ends. That makes me wonder, what is the point? Why should I care about these people, or my attitude towards them? At the end of the episode, you screw with Big Joe by stealing his truck, maybe even damage his other cars, and then the episode ends. But Big Joe never goes after you. Game shows Joe as angry, not afraid of confrontation. He demonstrates it on several occasions. But there is no punishment for stealing his truck and damaging his property, the biggest of all offenses against him. Character moments show what he is like, but also serve as plot promises. You mess with him, you're gonna get beat up. Or worse, we don't know what he's capable of. But when you make an action, which should make him very angry, it doesn't have any consequence. It is a loose end. You need to show to the player that their actions are meaningful. A good way to show it is through the characters they know, or even better, care about. That's why we are talking about character moments. They are a great way to endear characters to the audience, often quickly. Character moments can catch our attention, but it takes time to truly care about other characters' judgment or the character itself. Consider this real-life example. We watch news about people being killed every day in every place around the world, but we don't really feel anything for them. We consider it a sad state of affairs, pitiful, but we don't cry for strangers or attend their funerals. That would seem inappropriate to those who were actually close to them. But many people are genuinely sad when they hear that, for example, a famous actor died. They spent years seeing him around in the movies, and they grew closer to him and somewhat cared about him, even though they have never met him and didn't even know his real personality, just his characters. They feel like they knew him, were close to him, because they have hours of fond memories of watching him over the years. Same goes for musicians or any famous person who had any, even superstitious, effect on them. But Life is Strange 2 feels more like a news story, presenting fate of strangers. You meet a character, you get a quick rundown of who they are, often just through Sean's diary, not even through player interaction with that character, and then they are gone, on to the next one. It is very hard to care for any of the characters in this game, because the game itself treats them like they are disposable. They are gone as soon as the episode ends. Sean doesn't care either, he doesn't want to stay with them, he just wants to go to Mexico. The game frustratingly decided that most of the characters and smaller stories and interactions just don't matter, and as a result, they carry no consequence to the future. And also, because we are not confronted with the results of our actions, even good character moments sometimes feel empty. They are seemingly setups with invisible payoffs, without payoffs, and in terms of emotional impact on the player, they are not only false promises or loose ends, they are dead ends. You hurt Layla's feelings? You don't suffer any consequence. You don't listen to Claire and Steven? No issue. Damage Big Joe's truck? No problemo. Shit all over Karen in episode 4? Still live with her in the next one. Let the emotion breathe a little. These interpersonal ties grow slowly, like roots, but in time, and if properly cared for, they will grow deep and wide. I find it fitting that Sean finds the most compatible characters for creating intimate ties in an ancient forest ecosystems with deep roots. Through and through the series, I'm trying to give examples of building up the world and characters to make a stronger foundation for players' care. Because the stronger the roots of care, affection, and love are, the stronger they endure and stay with the player. But also, equally important for storytelling, the more painful it is when they get ripped out of the ground. Back in the camp. After spending some time with others, Sean takes Daniel to a nearby lake to practice his power. It is hard to comment on brothers' relationship at this part because it depends on your previous decisions, but it is fair to say that this training scene is a good bonding moment between Sean and Daniel, who demonstrates that his powers got significantly stronger. After the training, Daniel blames Sean for not trusting him to keep his power secret. Sean tells Daniel not to be so emo. That fits from Sean, right? Tortured artist shit. And tells him to grow up. Daniel gets pretty upset, lifts a massive redwood tree stump out of the lake, and tells Sean he's not a little kid anymore. There is nothing you can do about this. Nothing you say changes the end of the scene. A little pointless observation here is that Daniel is angry with Sean for not spending enough time with him while they are spending time together, which is weird even for emo Daniel. The scene is pretty powerful though, because Daniel seems legitimately scary. It seems like a foreshadowing to something. We don't know what is Daniel planning to do with that stump. Would he be willing to use it against Sean? Just a few minutes earlier, Daniel scared Sean by pretending to drop a log on him, and I cannot help but seeing a parallel here. Also, throughout the game, Daniel keeps talking about contacting his mom, which Sean vehemently refuses. So, let's add up the information. Daniel doesn't want to go to Mexico, doesn't want Sean to boss him around, does want to find his mom, and knows Sean cannot physically stop him. Sean just maintains he wants to go to Mexico and take Daniel with him. Seems like a recipe for disaster. I will go on a little tangent concerning Sean's character. Again. This time it's not a meaningful addition, I'm just contemplating here. I have noticed one interesting thing here, and it has nothing to do with the game, but with communism. Okay, that's probably gonna need some explanation. I don't want to spend too much time on this detour, so I'll simplify things with the risk of losing accuracy. The concept of communism is simple. Every member of society contributes with something, so everyone in the society can live decently. It has never worked in the history of human society, because humans, while social creatures, are still programmed predominantly for self-preservation. But there are real-life situations where communism actually works. Family is the prime example. Every member of a family does whatever they can to keep the entire family alive. Some bring money, prepare food, wash clothes, clean house, and so on, right? It doesn't really matter who does what as long as everybody is somewhat content. For example, children don't bring any economical benefit, but parents won't just throw them into garbage. Sorry if your parents were shit. I understand your plight. But the point is, it works. In family units, it works. There's another example where it somehow works. And it is in, surprise, hippie communes. It's in the name. People share property, possessions, resources, try to help out as they can. The game shows two different communes, Finns and Karens. Finns is nomadic and everybody experiences some inner turmoil. Karens has settled down and people there are more mature, at peace. I find it interesting because Sean is so obsessed with family adhesion that he wants to drag Daniel to Mexico kicking and screaming if he has to, because he is family. He feels he's the only one who can take care of him and the only one who has the right. At the same time, it goes completely over his head that he finds himself amongst the people whose worldview fits roughly within the same frame. Hannah tells Sean during one of their optional dialogues that she hates posers, and that just putting on a knapsack doesn't make anybody one of them. And later, if the player chooses to stay and get a haircut, Cassidy teases Sean that somebody may think that he is one of them. Even though Hannah has that kind of fuck you attitude, she seems like she would accept Sean eventually. Actually, it is Sean who's pushing these people away, even though they like him well enough. We hear from multiple characters that they love Daniel, but Daniel still feels alone because Sean doesn't like it when Daniel bonds with others. It is pretty clear, for example, while he watches Finn and Daniel in the Big Joe's truck after their knife-throwing practice. It is only in the commune in episode 5 when Sean learns how to relax, lets Karen and other people take care of Daniel for some time, and stops thinking that he's the only one who needs to babysit his brother at all times. And Daniel accepts this and is happy around other characters, even though none of them is similar in age. Out of a sudden, Daniel doesn't seem like a complete pain in the ass. The point is that Sean is all about family, but when he's offered one, he refuses, because it is not his blood family. He seems to operate on the premise that blood is thicker than water. Doesn't mean what you think. People often understand it as family ties are more important than water ties? It doesn't make sense like this, does it? Because this is a shorter form of the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. Now it makes sense. The contract you make is more significant than the family ties you are born into. Would you like to know more? The link is in the description. Never mind that. What I find quite fascinating is that no matter how I try to connect to Sean's thinking and character, I always find him to be somehow different from me. Sean's character feels so empty. No changing goals, no new interests, no bonds to other characters. He's like a machine, not like a person. There is so much potential for him to evolve, to change, to gain new perspectives. And I think this is the right moment to talk about character arc in a story. Typically, character will go through some sort of development that forms his worldview, his knowledge, his beliefs and faith, challenges him and changes him as a person to be able to overcome conflict and antagonist, makes him better as a person. This is often called a hero's journey. You could say Sean experiences a hero's journey because he goes through its typical beats. Sean is forced out of home, finds a mentor, Brody, finds friends to help him, Finn's hippies, then gets to the lowest point, loses friends, gets hurt, loses an eye, loses his brother Daniel even, has a moment of atonement, in the church for that matter. For that, he is rewarded, regaining his brother's favor and trust. Then, they both go to end the journey. Even going through it as a list, I already see problems. For example, nothing real is forcing Sean out of home. The mentor doesn't teach him anything useful. Sean doesn't feel like he belongs to a group of friends. How would he feel in a group of strangers in Mexico? Also, while he atones, he doesn't change his character, thus doesn't deserve the reward. And last, we don't know what the end of the journey is. Why is Puerto Lobos in Mexico better than any other place? But the hero's journey isn't just about moving from one place to another. It is about development of character, about overcoming obstacles. And Sean does a piss-poor job of that. Sean travels towards Mexico physically, but doesn't solve problems of how to cross the border, how to make money, how to put Daniel to school to educate him, how to make living, communicate with people, make friends and have a social life, how to avoid arrest in Mexico, and so many more. When Sean and Daniel were on their own, he couldn't provide money, food, clothing, security, nothing. He cannot even figure out how to make Daniel like him and respect him as an authority. What makes him think he can do any of these things now? If anything, he should now be aware that he cannot do this alone and should actively look for help of others. When Daniel got ill, The only thing Sean managed to do was run to his grandparents for help. Who would take care of Daniel if he got ill in Mexico? What would happen if Sean got ill? What would Daniel do in Mexico when he doesn't even speak the language? How could he possibly get educated and lead a happy and fulfilling life? I will mention this again at the end of episode 5, but let's face it, however Daniel ends up in Mexico, he becomes a criminal. That is not a good sign, that is not a good outcome. It doesn't matter how far south Sean moves if he's no closer to solving these issues on his journey. It just doesn't work for Sean. Over the entire game, he never learns anything. There are no triumphant moments or discoveries, no character improvements. Sean is just slowly going under. So, no hero's journey or positive character arc for Sean, right? We don't have to go far for a good example of character development. Life is Strange 1. During your gameplay, Max learns all sorts of things about Arcadia Bay and its inhabitants, explores all nooks and crannies, solves mysteries and uncovers secrets and nefarious plots. That shapes her character, and with all the acquired knowledge, she can make an informed decision about the fate of the city and people living in it. Do they deserve to live? Or is the society not worth saving in exchange for losing your soulmate? That is a very satisfying resolution. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it feels good to decide. There's an insane amount of pressure on the player, but the fact that you have tried everything else gives you the sense of reaching the end of the journey. It is wholesome. So many events in the game lead you to that exact moment of grave decision. Only through your decision can you experience catharsis provided by the ending animation. As an alternative to Hero's Journey, you can have a flat character arc, where protagonist's beliefs don't change. Sean just wants to go to Mexico with his brother. Wonder Woman believes only love will save the world. Sherlock Holmes uses the power of logic and deduction to unwrap mysterious crimes, and so on. Characters don't evolve. But in order to present a satisfying flat arc to your audience, you need to find a way to make it interesting. One of the ways can be making the main character's determination reflect on other characters. In case of Life is Strange 2, that means mostly Daniel. The problem, in this case, is that Daniel often does the opposite of what you tell him, or doesn't respect you, and while that certainly is a change, it feels frustrating to the player, and I'm not sure that frustrating your audience is the best usage of flat character arc. And while there are significant, tangible developments in Daniel's character, clearly visible at the end of the game, it feels very unrewarding, or at times even punishing throughout the game, to just serve as a vessel for Daniel's character development. You need to give the player some joy as well. Other characters don't play their roles long enough for us to see the effects of our decisions on them, with only a few unimpactful exceptions. You can also make flat character arc interesting by presenting a doubt, and as I have mentioned earlier, I thought this will be the twist of the game. Sean will gain experience on his travels and starts to have a doubt. Is going to Mexico the best idea? Is it the best idea for Daniel? Is it the best way to protect him, to ensure his education, happiness, and a good future? Doubt can be a powerful tool if used correctly, but Sean never shows any. He is dead set on his goal, his beliefs never change, literally to the last moments of the game. But then it's too late. If doubt isn't presented early in the game, then the last second reveal that he can give up on his plan to go to Mexico actually undermines the seriousness of his entire journey. Do you remember how I talked about harmony? This is it. I want to be able to connect to Sean, and during the game I had many moments where I felt I could share my feelings with Sean, for example in his relationship with Cassidy. But he makes it impossible. He's very closed off and doesn't allow me to mold him, to guide him through the story. If I'm playing as a character, I need to be in his head. If I want to feel with him, I need to know how he feels. Like when he tried to lift that little stone with his mind at the beginning of episode 2. I need to know if he ever has any doubt. But he never has. There's no setup for it, no foreshadowing, no way for me to connect to Sean. And while I see more and more problems just piling on without having any ability to solve them, he remains completely and utterly convinced throughout the entire game that he's doing the right thing. Even many of Sean's dialogue options are synonymous or make no difference. And I am stuck with him. I fully understand why Daniel rebels. I want to rebel too.
I'm not a kid anymore.
Alright, the campfire scene. It's great. A cozy atmosphere, intimate character moments, everything. The only thing I felt was strange was that if Sean drinks beer and takes a hit from a bong, then he automatically refuses to talk about his worst experience. I feel cheated. You should too. I mentioned earlier how important are options and alternative scenes, but there needs to be a recognizable cause and effect. Later haircut scene is a good example because it suggests what are the possible negatives. This is a bad example because I really don't understand the logical connection between drinking and sharing. Quote, "No way, man. I'm too wasted." Doesn't make sense. These things aren't mutually exclusive. If anything, I would expect drugs and alcohol to loosen Sean up a little. Nope, same old tortured artist shit. Let the player control what Sean says and have Sean talk a little more. He mostly communicates in sighs. So, while I absolutely loved watching exchanges between characters, I would like the entire scene to be just a little bit more interactive. I would love Sean to be more involved, no matter what he chooses to do. Just a few meaningless lines of dialogue, like during the weed trimming scene. Man, I hate that one. Involving the player a little bit more could make it harder to decide whether they want to stay or leave with Daniel. It is so strange when people share their innermost stories and your playable option is to throw a pine cone into the fire. Or have a possibility to overdo it with alcohol and weed and let Sean pass out and miss out on the next scene. Side note, I was also a little bit disappointed when I couldn't pass the joint to Daniel. I wonder how many people would do that. But honestly, these are just nitpicks. Overall, the scene is amazing and gets you close to other characters. And the only real issue is that the feeling won't have much time to sink in and grow. Or brew. Bubble? Pick your own metaphor. One note about the get haircut part. Sean gets asked if he likes girls or boys. It really is out of the blue question. This is another example of the disconnect between me and my character. I wish I knew, at least from his diary. By this point, I have spent quite some time with Sean's character, months of in-game time, and I had no idea he can feel that way. What is he like? What he likes? Again, I was put into the position of an observer. I know so little about the character I'm supposed to be playing. It would feel much more natural to me to answer based on some prior knowledge. The player can obviously choose whatever answer he wants, but it is not set up by anything before the game. Quite to the contrary. In the very first scene of the game, it is established that Sean has crush on Jen and is nervous about meeting her.
Dude, we talked about this. Could you have any less game?
I'm no good at this.
Having the player show interest in a male characters now goes against established information, and that is why it felt so unexpected or out of place. I mentioned how some people say that this game is making heavy-handed commentary on political and social issues, and this is it. And it feels like a cop-out. Like, allow the player to pick his sexual orientation in an obscure piece of dialogue thing. If the game wasn't so episodic, you could easily weave this into the story. Example? At the beginning of the game, Lila asks Sean about his feelings for Jen, right? With just a little change to the dialogue, you could make it interactive. Have Sean and Lila comment on few people attending the party, like, you have to come to the party, it's gonna be the best, you know who's coming, there's gonna be Jen, there's gonna be Eric, and so on. And let the player discuss them. Give player options to say something about them along the lines of, I like Jen, don't like Jen, I think Jen is cute, I like Eric, I don't like Eric, I think Eric is cute, Lila, stop being nosy. Player's choice will then influence what Lila, the love witch, does. Instead of Jen, she may send a text message to Eric, and the player will now be aware that Sean can feel that way. Obviously, it would work better if you had a chance to meet those characters and then make up your mind, but you get the point. Now, you have what I called a narrative thread, and you can weave it into your story. You wait for 2 episodes, and when Sean meets Finn, it won't feel so sudden to discover you can have romantic feelings for him, because you have made a similar decision at the beginning of the game already, and here you are reminded of it. Or aren't, if you didn't decide anything. Freedom of choice matters, even if used to ignore opportunities. Why am I mentioning this? Mostly because based on Sean's and Lila's conversation about Jen from the beginning of the first episode, I took Sean for heterosexual, and later looked at his every interaction with Finn from that perspective. I wonder how other players felt about it. That means you. Yes, you, specifically you, the listener. I just wish there was some foreshadowing for that, so I, as the player, wasn't put on the spot so much, because when I got asked that question, I just had to pause for a moment and think what about Sean did I miss? I had to replay Sean's and Finn's interactions in my head and think, was there anything sexual about that? Any romantic feelings or suggestions I missed? I just assumed that Sean admired Finn's character, thought he was so cool, and that was it. That took me out of the moment, out of the atmosphere of the scene. Unfortunately, creators just made this into a short scene in episode 3. Just click here and be done with it, and your choice instantly disappears in the past. And for the love of God, don't mention homosexuality or the word gay. Jean-Luc Cano, one of the writers, comments on this in a sense that players can pick whatever they want. That is obviously true, but it feels inorganic, once in a game pick. If the player knew that Sean could be gay or bisexual, it would be great to give the player different options on multiple occasions, as is the case later with Arthur, Stanley, and Daniel's observation about kissing. Expand on it in multiple places in the game. Why not? In episode 4, Jacob admits he was kicked out of the community for being gay, and that scene again plays out, as I have mentioned here, without saying the word gay, homosexuality, and so on. It is treated like a big taboo. But it feels like it is more of a taboo for someone high up in the creation process of the game, rather than for the in-game characters. I can understand why Jacob would be shy about it, given his background, but Finn? And Hannah? At least, let the player voice his opinion on the matter through Sean. Or, give the player outspread dialogue options based on his previous choices.
Can't really say anything about it yet.
In other words, writers, producers, studios, publishers, or whoever's responsible for this, don't be afraid. It is okay to have gay characters. And a huge advantage you have in a game, compared to say a movie, is that you can spend quite a long time with characters and truly explore them. Like you have already done in Life is Strange 1, where you had the character of Warren Graham, who helped you discover how you and your character feel. Sometimes I can't shake the feeling that studios or producers project it would lower the game's sales if it portrayed male homosexuality, which is less likely to be accepted by a certain audience. And as a result, They tone it down to the point it is unperceivable, like your relation to Finn until the point the game flatly asks you, "Do you like boys?"
Okay, lovebirds, that's it for me. Gotta work tomorrow.
To comment on the other branch, when you go to bed with Danielle, it is a great bonding moment. So good, in fact, that it is hard to understand what actually is Danielle's problem in this episode. Because overall, every time I had a chance to interact with Danielle, it felt like we were doing fine. It was whenever I couldn't choose to interact, things were bad. Where communication is impossible, war is inevitable. Also, he tells you he doesn't wear his watch because they don't fit on his wrist anymore, if you longed for this information.
Come on!
Sean, move it now!
What? Fuck me! No.
John! 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 John!
Let's go!
John! Woo! Okay. This is boring.
Next scene, Payday. After a bit of chit-chat, Sean tells Daniel to wait outside while Meryl gives you money for this week's work. Daniel swears he will, but obviously breaks into Meryl's office and gets caught by Big Joe. Meryl fires Sean and tells Big Joe to teach Daniel a lesson. Daniel is scared and using his power hits Joe over the head with a plate or tray. Joe didn't see what happened, but others did and realized Daniel has a superpower. Joe is pissed and asks who did it. I like that when you do nothing, Finn is the one to take responsibility. Do you remember how I talked about how other than player characters can take action leading you to the same result and make you feel good about different options? This is the moment.
Look!
Later, in the camp, the group talks about Daniel's power. Jacob is shaken, considers it a sign from God, but promises he won't talk about it and leaves. But Finn hatches a plan to use Daniel to rob Meryl.
Meryl's safe. It's like a fucking ATM.
The idea gets initially shut down.
No fucking way, Finn. Don't pull a kid into your stupid shit.
The scene continues just as it did the whole episode. Sean scolds Daniel. Daniel tells him to chill out. Sean says they need to get to Puerto Lobos. Daniel says, "Who cares about Puerto Lobos?" And Sean answers that they'll talk later. I'm sorry for retelling the story of the game, but the point is, these two scenes took about 15 minutes of real time to play out, and you, the player, couldn't do anything. All of these things seem to be very important, but the player gets no chance to influence the story. After what is basically a super long cutscene, you get to control Sean, and your option is to go to the party and have a small talk with people for the last time. Don't get me wrong, I find the story engaging, but at this point I'm pretty tired from the fact that the game informs me about what important decisions the main character did without me, and then lets me do some flavor action to give me a sense of participation in the story. Here, trim some weed butts. And I have to repeat myself when I say that I would like some options, even if they would later backfire on me, so I would have some sense of control over the course of the story. For example, at the party, you get to talk to Finn, and you may agree on robbing Meryl, or you can tell him to stick it. That is the kind of decision that should be present on multiple places in the game. Ultimately, you will end up at Meryl's anyway, but getting there to rob the place or to stop the robbery makes a huge difference. But since the game offers multiple options so rarely, this sort of decision is also a dead tell of where the game's gonna end up. Not that I mind, just saying. Other than that, I felt kinda bummed out about dialogue options with minor characters because it seemed like they didn't really reveal much. I wish the party lived a little. Instead, it felt like a death bell. You know, I kinda felt this was the last time with those characters, so I was hoping for some memorable experience with them. Let everybody have some fun for the last night together. Dancing, jumping across the fire, naked streaking, that kind of thing. Speaking of fun, I have to talk about the whole Sean, Finn, Cassidy love triangle. Pardon me, I cannot resist poking into this stuff. First, Sean can kiss Finn, right? I sort of wish they could do more. It feels imbalanced compared to Sean's options with Cassidy. Or maybe a better description would be toned down. I think it would be very cool if, depending on the intimacy level with their characters, they could switch places. Meaning, during the episode, you would get options to interact with them, and if you had shown certain tendencies, it would be Finn inviting you to skinny dipping and later to his stand, while Cassidy would get baked on a tree log. You could go on your crime spree later. As I have said before, it would probably require a little bit more preparation for this in earlier episodes, but it would work. I'm sure some people would complain about forced SJW propaganda bullshit, but honestly, Finn is a pretty cool character and Sean does have a lot of reasons to admire him, so their romantic involvement isn't surprising, minus the reservations I voiced earlier about establishing characters' preferences in advance. I kinda cheer for a good depiction of a homosexual relationship. There are, however, ways to send your message strongly without it being heavy-handed or clumsy or insensitive. And I think this game could have had just that, but instead was maybe a little bit too careful. It was circumambulating the subject. As we say, it was walking around the hot mesh.
Right on.
To talk about romance with Cassidy.
The best way to remember somebody is...
Oh, fuck. Fuck! Oh, shit. My ball.
Come on, heartbreaker. You know everybody likes you. I plead guilty.
Yeah. I like you too.
You sure? So, do you want to kiss me?
I do. If that's cool.
Yes, it is.
I assume the game was thematizing consent, since Cassidy asked Sean about every advance she made, which is different than the typical approach in media, where consent is implied by actions of participants. This made the scene a little bit more awkward than it needed to be, but I get it. It is the point for it to be awkward, and I appreciate this approach. Just maybe don't let Sean be such a sourpuss afterwards.
Sorry it sucked.
Triumphant moments, guys! Triumphant moments for the player! After half of the game where people just kicked Sean in the teeth, he finally found somebody who liked him well enough to have sex with him. That is a good thing. You can stop it with the tortured artist shit. I really like that phrase. You can read more about it in an article I linked below. Anyway, most of the things after that changed slightly, so let's just go over the basic beats. You steal Big Joe's truck, maybe even damage his other cars. It doesn't really matter. The episode is about to end, which means Big Joe's character is basically out of the picture for good. You know, as I have talked about before. You get to Meryl's farm, get caught, Daniel destroys the room, runs away, Sean loses an eye. The difference is that in some cases it is accidental result of Daniel's anger directed at Meryl, in other that is a result of Daniel's anger aimed at you, more or less. And so we find ourselves in the outro. I'll be honest, I felt a little tired. I will talk about it in detail in episode 4, but as I was watching the outro, I felt kinda let down, because I had such a little influence over Daniel. While I understand that it was the point of this episode, meaning even when you think you have done your best, things may not go your way, I also think it is not a very good idea to make the player feel like they want to give up. I wasn't on board with the whole Mexico thing in the first place, and especially with this ending it felt like something unmanageable. Why would Sean drag Daniel with him after such a tantrum where Sean lost an eye, I wasn't even sure who was dead, and overall, throughout the episode, Daniel was kind of a brat. So, as the camera was panning over Daniel's destruction, I was trying to come up with a storyline that would make sense and kept me engaged for the next 2 episodes. Let me sketch what went through my head. At the end of episode 2, Daniel says that using his power always brings trouble, right? We have spent quite some time bonding to a bunch of characters who got injured or killed as a result of Daniel using his power, his pursuit of individuality, and not listening to Sean's advice. And, during the training sequence in episode 3, Daniel looked pretty scary. So my idea was that with loss of his eye, Sean will start to see Daniel as unmanageable and dangerous, and in order to protect those he developed actual care about, who are not just part of his blood family, Sean will decide to get rid of Daniel, in a good way or bad. Throughout the game, we've had about as many good moments with Daniel as we have had bad. But the bad ones got very much physical, they were violent outbursts. So the idea was that the trauma caused by father's death, where Daniel killed the police officer, was simply so deep that despite Sean's best efforts, despite his father's wish, despite everything, Daniel could not be controlled. And because from the third episode's ending cinematic wasn't clear who was alive or dead, I thought that Finn's or Cassidy's demise would be a fairly good catalyst for Sean to try and stop his brother, or even seek revenge. It would for sure require a slightly different setup in previous episodes, but I think it would be a bold twist nevertheless. The interesting part being not only the fact that Daniel is just a 9-year-old kid, but also that he has a superpower, unlike his very fragile brother. So pacifying him or getting rid of him wouldn't be challenging only morally, but also physically. If I lost an eye because of someone, I would be probably fairly angry with them. Sean clearly doesn't hold it against Daniel in the slightest. But you know what struck me more? That Daniel left him. I thought Sean would draw a parallel between Karen leaving him and Daniel doing the same, especially in a situation when he was vulnerable or wounded respectively. I understand there is a difference in those characters and their motivation, but it may be hard to see for someone who just got hurt. Anyway, Sean doesn't feel shaken in his conviction to find Daniel and take care of him and bring him down to Mexico, so I was alone in my struggle with motivation. I'm mentioning this again only to show how differently Sean and I think, even after spending 3 entire episodes together. Coming back to the actual story, I felt that at the episode's end there wasn't a whole lot of incentive for the player to continue in Sean's quest, at least with Daniel, especially in comparison to other possible explorable storylines. Daniel was drifting away, which he has been for the last 3 episodes, and the subplot with robbing Meryl wasn't even introduced until the last minute. During this episode, the momentum of the main story came to a screeching halt, and with it my motivation to continue. It is fine to end the episode on a grim note, but you need to show your audience there are great expectations for the future episodes. You cannot just end it with, is he dead? And he? And she? Type of cliffhanger. Answer to that can only be yes or no, and in case of Life is Strange 2, doesn't promote good storytelling, because these characters will be abandoned after this episode ends. The scene creates an urgent sense of suspense, but it is fairly empty in terms of plot promise. Yes or no? A little story to be had? Few emotions to be explored? Relationships to be broken or reforged? And while the outro is no doubt powerful in terms of emotional impact and raises some anticipation for the next episode, my main problem is that it also brings undesirable emotions to the mix, stemming from the fact that the creators straight up left out so much of the character development and exploration, adventure, social and emotional bonding, and just glossed over it in a form of journal entry, and instead presented the player with minigames and mundane tasks. And as you can probably tell from the length of this part of my essay, that frustrates me to no end.